So this phenomenon that we're having with black people, gratefully, thankfully, it isn't a monolithic crisis, right, affecting all of black people. Rather, it's a set of overlapping trends and movements within a part of the black diaspora, particularly African Americans, of course. So this is driven by a mix of historical erasure, psychological responses to trauma, search for empowerment, the amplification of alternative narratives via social media and the internet. I'm gonna break this down step by step, focusing on key elements I mentioned: the denial of African descent, questioning the transatlantic slave trade, adopting identities like Israelite, Egyptian, pretending, and even Irish or Scottish, right? So these aren't new. Some trace back approximately a century, but they've gained visibility over the recent years with the advent of the internet and social media. So we'll start off with the historical and psychological roots of this. The core driver, of course, is the long-term impact of slavery, colonialism, and systematic racism, which disrupted connections to Africa and our heritage. So during the transatlantic slave trade, which forcibly trafficked millions of Africans to the Americas between the 16th and 19th century, enslavers deliberately stripped our people of their languages, their names, their religion, their culture, their ties to break the spirit and to prevent an uprising. All right. So that is the origins of what created general miseducation and identity fragmentation. Then you had post-slavery Jim Crow laws, segregation, lynching, grape, and all the ongoing discrimination that reinforced feelings of inferiority and a disconnection for mainstream narratives of black history. So as a result, black individuals and groups seeking alternative identities that feel more empowering or quote unquote noble to them, than the dominant story of the victimhood. So this can manifest as rejecting African roots in favor for claiming descent of an ancient civilization or biblical figures, often based on a selective interpretation of history, archaeology, and scripture. So psychologically, this is tied to what some of us call an identity crisis, stemming from cultural disconnection and a desire for self-determination. For instance, like upward mobility or assimilation into a white-dominated society can exacerbate this, leading to a loss of cultural anchors and a quest for a new one. So let's start off with the questioning for the transatlantic slave trade. Some of the black community questions the downplays and the slave trade scale, mechanics, or even its existence as taught by standard history. This is stemming from conspiracy theories. Alternative history circulating online, which argue that the narrative was fabricated to divide black people or to hide their true origins as indigenous peoples. Which once again, y'all cannot use that. Sir Thomas Browne in 1646 wrote Pseudodoxia Epidemica. He brought that word into the English lexicon, to the Oxford English Dictionary. And it was there to make a distinction between the Native Americans and the Africans. Some of you may have asked, why does there need to be a distinction? Because they're different. But yeah, claims that Africans sold Africans, it oversimplifies the complex pre-colonial dynamics like intertribal conflicts, European coercion, and are used to shift the blame or to deny the collective trauma. Other points to African complicity in the trade, like some kingdoms profited from it as a way to challenge diasporic unity or emphasize distinction between African and Americans. And recent African immigrants. So fringe views even suggest that the trade was exaggerated altogether and that black Americans are indigenous to the Americas and not Africa. So this is echoing pseudo-historical ideas that is really just spread off of YouTube and TikTok. That's their origins. Unless you want to go to like the Moors and Empress Religiosity in Louisiana. The skepticism this isn't widespread though, but it gains traction amidst the distrust of the institutions, with things like the Tuskegee experiments and a desire to reclaim agency over one's own story. So it's amplified by social media algorithms that promote sensationalism, and all of that type of content. That's why, when I scream and be obnoxious, the post will do better is where I'm just showing sources. I can't remember where I read this, but it said if you have actual words on your post, it's less likely to go viral. Why? Because, obviously people can't read. But claiming the Israelite and Egyptian identity, this is one of the most prominent examples, often linked to the Black Hebrew Israelite groups or the Afrocentric movement. Black Hebrew Israelites, they emerged around late 1800s from black Christians holding these traditions in the South. So BHI believed that black people, along with the Latinos and Native Americans somehow, are true descendants of the ancient Israelites from the Bible. And this is wild because unless those Latinos are actually Native Americans and they actually come from Europe, but I guess we can have that discussion later, but they interpret slavery and oppression as a fulfillment of the biblical curses for disobedience and views white Jews as imposters. So the core beliefs include adopting Hebrew names like Tazari. I don't even know if that's Hebrew, but they follow the Old Testament laws, reject most of the new Christianity, New Testament, and some of its sects. So it started as a response to what? Racism. To empower. That's the main word. They're like, all of this misinformation derives from empowerment, right? So, and to empower somebody, unfortunately, some people will, substitute the truth for that. And that's just the most unfortunate thing, because you're trying to do something good, but you ultimately end up doing something negative. But yeah, they try to empower black people by linking them to a chosen biblical lineage rather than a primitive African stereotype, right? So today, fringe extremist branches like those tied to the incidents in the news promote anti-Semitism and hate, but not all the BHI groups are, like, of course, into the violent. Many live in communities and just, preach on the street. The Egyptian and the Moorish claim that's similar to the BHI. Some adopted Hotep and Moorish science temple ideologies, claiming descent from the ancient Egyptians, Moors, or the other North African empires. This draws from early 20th century Afrocentrism, works by scholars like Cheikh Anta Diop, but of course, you had the extremists who turned it into pseudo-history, arguing that black people built the pyramids and kings and queens before slavery erased it. So, yeah, it's a cultural naturalism to counter Eurocentric history that was portrayed Africa as backwards. These identities provide the same sense of pride and community as the face of marginalization, but they can lead to isolation and conflict within mainstream black groups or even the Jewish groups. So some people even claim it's Irish and Scottish ancestry. This is more recent and a niche because it's often tied to the DNA testing rather than a full denial of African roots, even though they conflate it to do so. But many African Americans do have genuine European admixture, around 20 to 20% on average, from slavery, of course, when the white slave owners, frequently the Irish, Scottish, or English, raped enslaved women and had close relationships. So DNA like 23andMe often show Irish or Scottish regions as prominent just because those ancestries are overrepresented in the U.S. genetic databases. Irish immigrants common in the South, surnames like Murphy, O'Brien, these are some of the names that was passed down. So, however, this takes further exaggerating it into claims of being black Irish. That's a folk term for dark-haired Irish people. Sometimes it was mythically linked to the Spanish sailors or fully identifying as Celtic, distinct from African stereotypes. But online trims, misinformation might amplify this, but it's not as organized as BHI. It's more of a personal reinterpretation of ancestry results in amid the broader identity crisis and exploration. But speaking of broader, this phenomenon, what's really going on at its heart, this is about agency in a world where black history has been distorted or minimized. Movements like the ADOS, the American Descendants of Slavery, they highlight the tension, or also FBA, highlight the tension between U.S. black born people and African Caribbean immigrants. So this just emphasizing a unique American black identity shaped by slavery. Social media also plays a huge role, where the algorithms push echo chambers of unidentified, unverified, hidden history videos that fuel division. So it's not all downhill. So many black people embrace their African roots, like through Pan-Africanism, which is just the unity of the diaspora. It's not like about traveling back to Africa. It's not the definition of Pan-Africanism, but yeah, most people trace their DNA, find out they got the Mande, the Wolof, the Yoruba, the Inca, revive cultures like Kwanzaa. So we do have some benefits going on. I want to let y'all know that though this is on social media and it seems amplified, majority of people aren't on social media, so they're not even like knowledgeable about this misinformation. It's just what's going on, in short, for people who are coming across these, whether pretending Israelites, Hoteps, or any other thing outside of it. You see a black person representing something, and they're obviously of African descent. So this is just a little overview, just to tighten y'all up. It's the Don.